Okay, so this is the Daf for April 26, 2025. So we are in Makkot 18. It says, rather, the derivation is that the entire verse beginning, you may not eat within your gates the tithe of your grain, Deuteronomy 12:17, is a superfluous verse. After all, it is already written, and there you shall bring your burnt offerings, and your sacrifice, your tithes, and the donation of your hand, your vows, and your gift offerings, and the firstborn of your herd, and your flock, and there you shall eat before the Lord your God, Deuteronomy 12:6-7. All the items that must be eaten within the walls of Jerusalem are enumerated. Let the merciful one write simply, you may not eat them, in general terms, which would constitute a prohibition for which one would be liable to receive lashes for each of the cases enumerated. Why do I need the merciful one to again specify and enumerate in detail each of them? Rather, this repetition serves to designate additional prohibitions for each and every one of the cases enumerated in the latter verse, Deuteronomy 12:17. The prohibition is derived not by means of an a-fortiori inference, rather is derived from the superfluous verse. Rabbi Shimon derives by means of the a-fortiori inferences the additional prohibition that is in effect in each of these cases. With regard to the matter itself, Rava says, with regard to a non-priest who ate the flesh of a burnt offering before sprinkling his blood outside the walls, according to Rabbi Shimon, he is flogged with 5 sets of lashes. The Gemara suggests, and let him also be flogged for violating the prohibition, quote, and a non-priest may not eat, as they are sacred. Exodus 29:33. The Gemara explains this matter, prohibiting a non-priest from eating consecrated food, applies only in the case where the food is fit for consumption by priest. Here, where the food is not fit for consumption by priest either, it is, as it is not permitted for anyone to partake of a burnt offering, there is no specific prohibition that applies to a non-priest. The Gemara suggests, and let him also be flogged for violating the prohibition, quote, and any flesh torn of animals in the field you shall not eat. Exodus 22:30. From the term in the field, a general halach has derived. Once the flesh emerged outside of its partition and is in the field, that is, sacrificial meat that was taken outside the tabernacle curtains that demarcate the courtyard, there is a prohibition and the flesh is forbidden. The Gemara explains this matter, the prohibition against eating sacrificial flesh outside of the partition of the temple courtyard, applies only in the case where the flesh is fit for consumption inside the courtyard. Here, in the case of a burnt offering where the flesh is not fit for consumption inside, either as it is not permitted for anyone to partake of a burnt offering, there's no specific prohibition that applies to a non-priest partaking of the flesh outside of the courtyard. The Gemara suggests, let him also be flogged in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Eliezer, as Rabbi Eliezer says that when it states with regard to the leftover flesh and loaves from the inauguration offerings, it shall not be eaten because it is sacred, Exodus 29:34. It is derived that with regard to any item that is sacrificial and disqualified, for whatever reason, the verse comes to impose a prohibition upon its consumption. The Gemara explains, this matter applies only in a case where before its disqualification it was fit. Here it is a case where before its disqualification it was not fit either, and therefore the prohibition does not apply. The Gemara suggests, and let him also be flogged in accordance with the other statement of Rabbi Eliezer, as it is taught in a Baraita, that Rabbi Eliezer says, with regard to any item that is included in the mitzvah, it, quote, it shall be burned in its entirety, Leviticus 6:16. The verse serves to impose a prohibition upon its consumption, as it is written, and it shall be burned in its entirety, it should not be eaten, Leviticus 6:16. The Gemara explains, yes, it is indeed so, that according to Rabbi Shimon, one is flogged for violating its prohibition as well. And Rava is saying that from this verse, he is interpreting that it is derived that one is flogged with 5 sets of lashes according to Rabbi Shimon. Rav Gedel says that Rav says a statement about a priest, a Kohen, and another statement about a non-priest, a Tsar. Before proceeding, the Gemara provides a mnemonic for these statements, Kaf, Vav, Zayin, Aleph. Rav says a priest who ate a sin offering for a guilt offering before sprinkling their blood on the altar is flogged. What is the reason that he is flogged? It is, as the verse states, with regard to the inauguration offerings, whose halakhic status was like that of the sin offering and guilt offerings, in that it was permitted only for priests to partake of their flesh. And they shall, quote, and they shall eat them, that with which they were atoned. Exodus 29:33. From which it is inferred, after atonement, yes, they may eat the flesh of the offering. Before atonement, no, they may not eat it. And in Rav's opinion, the status of a prohibition that stems from a positive mitzvah is that of a prohibition for which one is flogged. Okay, Rava raised an objection based on the verse. And every beast that splits the hoof and has the hoof cloven in two and chews the cud among the animals, that you may eat. Deuteronomy 14, verse 6. that you may eat, but there is not any other animal that you may eat. The Torah prohibits eating the flesh of any animal that lacks indicators that it is kosher. And if it is, as you say, that an inference from the positive mitzvah entails a prohibition, why do I need the following verse, quote, this you may not eat, Deuteronomy 14, verse 7, as it was already inferred from the mitzvah. Rather, apparently, the status of a prohibition that stems from a positive mitzvah is that of a positive mitzvah, and one is not liable to receive lashes for its violation. Rather, if it was stated, this was stated, Rav Gidel says, that Rav says, a non-priest who ate a sin offering or guilt offering before the sprinkling of their blood is exempt from receiving lashes. What is the reason for this? It is as the verse states, and they shall eat them, that with which they atoned. And a non-priest may not eat, as they are sacred, Exodus 29:33. And it is expounded as follows, anywhere that we read concerning it, and they shall eat them, that which they atoned, we read concerning it, and a non-priest may not eat sacrificial food, but anywhere that we do not read concerning it, they shall eat them, that with which they were atoned. In this case, where it is prohibited for priests to partake of the flesh of the offerings before the sprinkling of the blood, we do not read concerning it, and a non-priest may not eat. Okay, the Gemara resumes the discussion of the halacha that was mentioned in the Mishnah with regard to the Torah verses that one recites. When he brings his first fruits to the temple, Rabbi Elazar says that Rabbi Hoshaya says with regard to first fruits, the lack of placement alongside the altar invalidates them, and they may not be eaten by the priest. The lack of recitation of the accompanying Torah verses does not invalidate them. So the Gemara asks, and did Rabbi Elazar say that? But doesn't Rabbi Elazar say that Rabbi Hoshaya says, if one set aside first fruits before the festival of Sukkot, and the festival elapsed over them, while they remain in his possession, they should be left to decay, as they cannot be rendered fit for consumption. What? Is it not that they cannot be rendered fit due to the fact that he can no longer recite the Torah verses over them, as one may recite the Torah verses only until Sukkot? And if it enters your mind to say that the lack of recitation does not invalidate them, why must they be left to decay? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Elazar holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Zera, as Rabbi Zera says, a principle with regard to meal offerings that applies in other areas as well. For any measure of flour that is suitable for mixing with oil in a meal offering, the lack of mixing does not invalidate the meal offering. Even though there is a mitzvah to mix the oil and the flour, the ad initio, I hate Latin words, the meal offering is fit for sacrifice even if the oil and the flour are not mixed. And for any measure of flour that is not suitable for mixing with oil in a meal offering, the lack of mixing invalidates the meal offering. Here too, although failure to recite the Torah verses does not invalidate the first fruits for consumption by the priest, that is referring only to when reciting the portion is possible. After Sukkot, when it is no longer possible to recite the portion, failure to recite the Torah verses invalidates the first fruits. Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov teaches, this halacha that was cited in the name of Rabbi Elazar as the statement that Rabbi Asi says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, as a result, an apparent contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Yochanan and another statement of Rabbi Yochanan is difficult for him. Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov says, or asks, and did Rabbi Yochanan say with regard to first fruits, the lack of placement alongside the altar invalidates them and they may not be eaten, while the lack of recitation of the accompanying Torah verses does not invalidate them? But didn't Rabbi Asi raise a dilemma before Rabbi Yochanan with regard to first fruits? From when is it permitted for a priest to partake of them? And Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Asi, it is permitted for the priest to partake of those first fruits that are fit for recitation of the accompanying Torah verses from when he receives those verses over them, recites those verses over them, and whose first fruits that are not fit for recitation of the Torah verses are permitted once they entered inside the temple. So Rabbi Yochanan apparently holds that first fruits that are not fit for recitation are not invalidated. In addition, he did not mention placement of the first fruits, indicating that the lack of their placement does not invalidate them for consumption by the priest. The Gemara notes the apparent contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Yochanan with regard to recitation and the other statement of Rabbi Yochanan with regard to recitation is difficult. And the apparent contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Yochanan with regard to the placement and the other statement of Rabbi Yochanan with regard to placement is difficult. The Gemara answers, the apparent contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Yochanan with regard to recitation and another statement of Rabbi Yochanan with regard to recitation is not difficult, as this statement, that when recitation is impossible, lack of recitation invalidates the first fruits is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon cited in the Mishnah. And that statement, which states that when recitation is impossible, lack of recitation does not invalidate the first fruits, is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, the majority. The apparent contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Yochanan with regard to placement and another statement of Rabbi Yochanan with regard to placement is not difficult either, as this statement that lack of placement does not invalidate the first fruits is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. That statement, which states that lack of placement invalidates the first fruits, is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, the majority. The Gemara asks, what is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda? It is as it is taught in the Braita. Rabbi Yehuda says, with regard to the verse written in the portion of the first fruits, and you shall place it before the Lord your God, Deuteronomy 26:10, that the reference is not to the placement of the fruits alongside the altar. Rather, this is a reference to waving the first fruits. Do you say that this is a reference to waving, or perhaps it is a reference only to actual placement of the first fruits? He explains, when it states earlier, and the priest shall take the basket from your hand and place it before the altar of the Lord your God, Deuteronomy 26, verse 4, placement alongside the altar is already stated. How do I realize the meaning of the term, and you shall place it? This is a reference to waving. The Gemara clarifies, and who is the Tana who disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda? It is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, as it is taught in the Braita with regard to the verse written in the portion of the first fruits. And the priest shall take the basket from your hand, Deuteronomy 26, verse 4. And this verse taught about the first fruits, that they require waving. This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? The Gemara explains, the matter is derived by means of a verbal analogy from one instance of the word hand, written with regard to the first fruits, and from another instance of the word hand, written with regard to peace offering. It is written here with regard to first fruits, and the priest shall take the wave basket from your hand, Deuteronomy 26, verse 4. And it is written with regard to a peace offering, he who offers his peace offering to God, his hand shall bring it, the fire of God, to raise it as a waving before God. Leviticus chapter 7, 29 to 30. Just as here with the case of first fruits, it is the priest who takes the basket in his hand and waves it. So too there, in the case of peace offerings, a priest performs the waving. Just as there, with regard to peace offering, it is the owner who performs the waving, as it is written, quote, he who offers, etc., his hand shall bring it. So too here, the owner waves the first fruits. How so? How can the waving be performed by both the priest and the owner? The priest places his hands beneath the hands of the owner and waves the first fruits together with the owner. Rabbi Bar Ada says that Rabbi Yitzchak says with regard to first fruits, and that is the end of 18.